At T-Mobile, our critical mission is providing unparalleled 5G coverage for when connectivity is mission critical. Introducing T-Priority, America's best 5G network experience for first responders, even in times of congestion. More capacity, faster speeds, better coverage. T-Priority from T-Mobile, built for tomorrow's emergencies, ready today. Discover more at t-priority.com.
For qualifying organizations on eligible rate plans, coverage not available in some areas and may be impacted by emergencies.
Every Pokemon Episode Ever podcast is now on YouTube. Go on YouTube and search Every Pokemon Episode Ever podcast and click that subscribe button to never miss an episode. Welcome back, everybody, to another fantastic episode of the Pokemon Adventures podcast, a short of the Every Pokemon Episode Ever podcast that I do with good old Dougie Fresh. And this week we are doing Chapter 10 of Volume 1, and it is titled Danger High Voltorb. So what I like to do at the beginning of each of these podcasts is give you a small recap as to what happened in the last episode. So last episode, we met Bill. Bill has his Pokemon transporter machine. He was accidentally transformed into a Rattata, and he needed help from Red to be transformed back into a human. But in the process, he was picked up by a wild pharaoh who Red had to go and rescue Bill. After rescuing Bill, we find out that he did capture that pharaoh, but he didn't keep it on his belt, everyone. He let Bill keep the Pokemon because Bill can give him his Pokemon and transport it to him anywhere in the world, no matter where he's at. Red was able to also transform Bill back into a human, and that was basically it. We ended last week's episode with a small advert of Red seeing the SSN, and he went to go running over towards the ship. So after he runs towards the ship, we are getting ready to start Chapter 10, Danger High Voltorb. And we start this week's episode with Red looking up at the SSN. He's like, man, that is a huge ship. And then he's like, I'm sunk if anybody sees me, and he walks up onto the ship. So Red has snuck onto the SSN at this point, everybody. And he sees a sailor holding a box over his head, and Red goes and he's like, aha! And he goes and walks underneath the box that the guy is carrying with one arm right next to his head, and kind of sneaks his way to another section on the boat. The sailor ends up going left and Red goes right. So he is now officially snuck onto this boat, and Red's like, I can't believe I'm getting away with this. I wonder how far I can go. And then all of a sudden we hear rattle, 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 rattle. And something is moving inside of a box. And he turns around. He's like, did I just hear something? And then he's like, I must be getting jumpy. And Red just starts walking away. And then all of a sudden the box starts rattling again. It's like rattle, rattle. But Red doesn't hear it this time. And Red starts walking on the boat. And he's like, I could use a map. And then we get Red passes right by a window and he sees a glimpse of something shiny. And he's like, huh? He's like, what was that? And he looks through the window and you hear mwomp. And then Red's like, ah! And he falls back. And then we see a bunch of the people that are on the boat. And they're like, a stowaway! Get him! And then from here, they pick up Red and then they toss him off the boat right before the boat is about to start casting away. And they're like, and stay out! And Red's like, ouch! As he gets thrown off of the boat. And then Red's like, didn't have to get so rough. And then Red's like, wait a sec. That thing, it had to be a Pokemon. But what's it doing on a ship? And it's at this point, Red is sitting down and he's just puzzled and he's thinking to himself. And then all of a sudden we hear, young man. And Red's like, huh? He's like, those spears you're wearing, might those be, by any chance, Pokeballs? And Red's like, yeah? Who are? Good for you, my boy. So young, but already a Pokemon trainer. And this old man is just looking at him. And Red's like, is that so amazing? And the man's like, and so humble besides. I can see you're not just any lad. Now let's have a look at what's inside those Pokeballs, eh? And he picks up Red by the back of his pants. Complete assault, everybody. And Red's like, but they're... And the old man's like, show me. And Red's like, cut it out. And all of a sudden we hear, pew, pew, pew. And the old man's like, remarkable. Simply remarkable. And we got Pikachu, Bulbasaur, and Poliwhirl kind of looking up like, what's going on here? And then the old man's like, you're in. You, my lad, are now an honorary member of the Pokemon Fan Club. And Red's like, Pokemon Fan Club? And then we shoot over to Vermilion City. And the old man's like, don't be shy, son. And he opens the door to this building that's labeled Pokemon Fan Club. Welcome, Pokemon. And he opens the door. You there, my girl. And he talks to one of the girls that's inside of the building. Will you take this to the post office for me? And then Red's like, a Pokemon stamp. And the old man hands the girl a letter, what looks like a letter. And then you hear some well, I'm guessing they're Pokemon trainers just talking over in the corner. And they're like, I swear there's nothing more go darn stubborn than a Caterpie. And then another one's like, well, at least they don't have hairball, or they don't have hairballs like my Rattata. And the old man's like, lad, you'll never find more devoted gaggle of Pokemon lovers than in this room. And Red's like, yeah? And he's like, take a look. The newsletter says it all. And he gives it, and he hands Red a newspaper that reads, We Love Pokemon, a case of Poke Love. And then I do have to kind of giggle at this because a subtitle right underneath it says, that's the last bath I'll take with my Tentacool. And Red's like, a bath with a... I think we all can kind of guess, like, why would you take a bath with a Tentacool? But we're going to keep this PG. And then the old man's like, everyone, please, may I have your attention? Allow me to introduce our newest member, my friend Red. And Red's like, whoa, wait, I, and everyone's like, golly, these Pokemon are certainly used to people, aren't they? Aren't they cute? And they're all playing with the Pokemon. We get a screen grab of Pikachu kind of getting irritated from being pet by all these Pokemon lovers. And this girl's like, how long have you had this Poliwhirl? As she's petting Poliwhirl on the head. And Red was like, since I was a kid. And Poliwhirl was just a Poliwag. And they're like, goodness, they are well behaved, aren't they? And Red's like, well, we've been traveling together for a long time, and they've bailed me out of plenty of battles. And then the room just goes quiet and it's shh. And Red's like, did I say something wrong? And the old man goes over to Red. He's like, you make your Pokemon do battle? And Red's like, what else would I do with them? And the guy's like, what kind of Pokemon lovers would we be if we made them fight? And then Red's like, they have to fight to evolve. He's like, ours just stay little and cute forever. And then all of a sudden, there's a trainer that just blasts right through the door. He's like, help! And he's like, someone stole my Executor. And everyone's like, and the old man's like, not again. As he looks over at a picture. And Red's like, what's wrong? And one of the girls is like, the director's Abra was stolen last month. And this guy is like, it's happening to all of us. And then another guy's like, that's a lot of Pokemon. And then the director is like, and there's nothing we can. And he just starts to cry. And then we get a close look of the director and his Abra. And Red's like, a Pokenapper, eh? And then all of a sudden, Red, it sounds like he slammed his fist down on a desk or something because it goes, bam! He's like, tell me everything you know about this case. And then we jump forward, and Red must have gotten all the information. And Red's like, okay. So the abductions happen around the same time every month. And they're like, yes. And Red's like, But it'd be too hard for anybody to get owners to get the Pokemon into their Pokeballs. Meaning the thieves would have to be able to transport full-size Pokemon somehow. And then someone's like, and then Red's like, but what could be big enough to? Oh, and then he looks out the window and sees the SSN. And Red's like, do you know where that ship is headed? And one of the guys is like, I've heard that Lieutenant Sarge, the Vermilion City gym leader, uses it to transport supplies to the Cinnabar Island. And Red's like, a ship full of supplies for a gym leader? Could those supplies be? And then he remembers back to hearing rattles inside of those boxes. And then the mysterious Pokemon that he saw through the window. And Red's like, bingo. Okay then. Time for me to take a cruise. And he goes and he pushes the door open. And then all of a sudden we hear, stop! And then Red turns around and then you hear tap, tap, tap. The old man with his cane. And he just glares at Red. If you must go, I have one request. And Red's like, it better be important. And the old man was like, would you leave your Pikachu behind for me to cuddle? And then we get the animation flop where Red just flops right onto the ground. He's like, boom. And Red's like, sheesh. And the next frame, you see Pikachu being held by the director, and Red, Bulbasaur, and Poliwhirl are now on their way over to the SSN. And then the next panel goes on the waterfront. So Red has finally made it back over to the SSN. And Red's like, okay, this time we go in from the back. And then all of a sudden we hear bloop. And then the next panel, we see Red holding on to Bulbasaur while Poliwhirl is, I'm guessing, pushing Red and Bulbasaur in the water. And from here, in the next panel, we see Bulbasaur using its vine to put Poliwhirl and Red onto the back of the ship. And Red's like, thanks, Bulbasaur. Wait there for me, okay? So he's keeping Bulbasaur in the water. Don't really agree with it. I don't know what the writer was thinking, because he could have easily have just called Bulbasaur back into its Pokeball, because you might need it for where you're about to go. But we fast forward again to Red opening a door on the ship, and it's like, he's like, this is the room where I saw that. And then it's like, dot, dot, dot. And he's like, huh? There's nothing here. And he's looking around at him and Poliwhirl. He's like, don't tell me I just imagined it. And then Red sees a ball on the ground. He's like, hey, a Pokeball. And he goes to grab the Pokeball. And then all of a sudden he hears, and all of a sudden it shocks the mess out of him. And we see that it's a Voltorb. And Red's like, ah! He's like, what is that? Stop it. He's like, Poliwhirl, attack. And we see Poliwhirl go and use what looks like it's water gun attack on this Voltorb. And it pushes Voltorb back. And Red's like, man, what kind of Pokemon was that? And then he looks back over at Poliwhirl. How you doing over there, Poliwhirl? And Poliwhirl's like, dot, dot, dot. And then all of a sudden, Poliwhirl just face plants out of nowhere. And Red's like, huh? Poliwhirl, what's wrong? So Poliwhirl looks like it was knocked out. And then all of a sudden we hear, ha, 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 ha. I'd say it's in shock. And Red's like, huh? And then we look back and we see Lieutenant Sarge. Water conducts electricity well. And then all of a sudden we hear doo doo doo. And we hear bzz, 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 bzz. And he's like, I'm famous for running a tight ship here. We deal with trespassers very harshly. And then we go to the next panel and we see the X's on Poliwhirl's eyes. And Red looks like he's just mad. And then all of a sudden we get an outside view of the SS Anne. And then another close-up of Lieutenant Sarge. And he's like, ha. And then all of a sudden we get into the next frame and we see Poliwhirl is just frying. He's like, not your usual child's play, is it, boy? Lieutenant Sarge goes. And that is where we end this week's episode. Because the next frame is the beginning of chapter 11. And it's titled Buzz Off Electabuzz. So this was a pretty good chapter. We met a director who now has Red's Pikachu, might I add. So Red was dumb enough to leave his Pikachu behind. He doesn't have his Pharaoh. He doesn't have his Bulbasaur because his Bulbasaur is just swimming in the water along the ship. And all he has is his Poliwhirl. And he is now surrounded by a bunch of electric Pokemon. What is he going to do? How is he going to get out of this? Poliwhirl seems like it's paralyzed, but I guess we'll find out. We'll find out next week, everybody. But all right, everyone, that is this week's episode. Next week's episode again is called Buzz Off Electabuzz, Chapter 11. And now it's time for all of our plugs. go ahead and follow us on Twitter at PokeBreakdown. And I go on there and I post about all of these episodes and more, including stuff about our regular podcast, the Every Pokemon Episode Ever podcast that I do with good old Dougie Fresh. And also, if you like this episode and you're listening to this on the free feed, go ahead and subscribe on Patreon at www.patreon.com/everypokemon. We have a section just for this manga. And if you're listening to this on the free feed, we are completely done with volume 1. If you want to hear what happens next and want to hear me review, for the low price of $5, you can subscribe and just be listening to the manga. Or for just a little bit more, you can subscribe and get all of our podcasts, including the movies, the manga, our weekly podcast a month in advance, and more. Any other specials that we put up on Patreon. There's a lot for you to go and grab. So go and make sure you subscribe. And every time that you subscribe on Patreon helps our podcast get a little bit better. And it helps us out in the long run for everything that we do for you here. But other than that, it was nice of you to listen to this episode. Thank you again, everybody. And I will end up seeing you next week for another Pokemon Adventures podcast. This is Professor Chris G, and I am signing out. Have a good night, everyone.